The night air was heavy, the kind that pressed down on the skin and muffled sound. Along the dark stretch of State Highway 47, the only movement came from the occasional rush of a semi-truck slicing through the blackness. Beyond the yellow lines and cracked asphalt, there was nothing but empty fields stretching for miles into the unseen. It was the kind of road where silence wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating, almost predatory. At 2:14 a.m., a passing driver noticed the faint glow of hazard lights flickering weakly against the darkness. The source was a patrol vehicle pulled to the side, its driver's door ajar, engine still running. The driver slowed, peering through the gloom, but no officer was in sight. The radio inside hummed softly with static, an eerie heartbeat against the stillness. The motorist hesitated, then reached for his phone with shaking fingers. There's a police car out here," he whispered to the dispatcher minutes later, as though the darkness might be listening. "The lights are on, but no one's here." When responding units arrived, the scene was unsettling in its simplicity. No struggle, no blood, no immediate sign of foul play. Just absence. An officer's presence erased, as though she had stepped out into the night and dissolved into the air. The supervising sergeant stood by the car, shining his flashlight into the surrounding brush. "Hayes!" he called out, his voice straining against the void. There was no reply. Only the low drone of insects and the hum of the idling engine answered him. Officer Clara Hayes. That name would hang heavily in the hours to come, repeated through radios, written across reports, and whispered with unease in squad rooms. Clara was known to be diligent, precise, not the type to leave her car running in the dead of night while vanishing into thin air. The search widened. Flashlights cut across the fields, beams, slicing through tall grass and shadow. Officers called her name again and again, their voices growing sharper, more frantic. Every unreturned call deepened the pit in their stomachs. A missing civilian was one thing. A missing officer was something else entirely. A threat to the Brotherhood, a warning that the badge itself offered no protection. Inside her cruiser, nothing was out of place. Clipboard, half-empty coffee cup, radio mic resting neatly where it should be. But the driver's seat was pushed slightly back, as though she had stepped out in a hurry. The silence of that small detail unnerved them most of all. By dawn, the scene took on the atmosphere of a crime drama unfolding in real time. News vans circled like vultures. Reporters pressed their cameras close, eager to broadcast mystery before facts could catch up. "Highway Patrol Officer Missing," the headlines would scream before noon, feeding speculation and fear. Among the officers present, there was unease they couldn't shake. Clara was steady. She wasn't reckless. Whatever had drawn her out of that car, it wasn't random. It had purpose. Still, whispers spread among the ranks as the sun rose. Some muttered about a possible ambush, cartel involvement, even serial predators who preyed on law enforcement. But there were others, quieter and more cautious, who exchanged looks they didn't explain. They knew Clara. They knew who she had partnered with on her last shift. Behind the uniform and silence of the morning briefing, one man clenched his jaw tighter than the rest. He answered questions when asked, kept his eyes steady, and even joined the search with the same determined energy as his peers. But beneath it all, his heartbeat thudded like a war drum. He knew the truth none of the others could yet imagine. And as the day stretched on, his silence grew heavier than the empty highway where it had all begun. By mid-morning, the precinct buzzed with the restless energy of unanswered questions. Officers shuffled between briefing rooms and radio desks, their conversations clipped, their tones edged with unease. A missing officer wasn't just a headline, it was a fracture in the armor of the department itself. The pressure was already building, and behind every exchange, there was an urgency to restore control. Among them stood Officer Daniel Mercer, his uniform pressed sharp, his demeanor calm, almost calculated. He answered every inquiry with precision, voice steady, eyes unwavering. "We split for a routine check near mile marker 213, he explained. "She never came back. I thought maybe she'd gotten another call." His words sounded rehearsed, clean of hesitation, but too clean, like a story polished until it gleamed. What most of his colleagues didn't notice, however, was the way Daniel's hands stayed buried deep in his pockets, fingers digging into the seams. The way he avoided glances that lingered too long. He carried himself like a man used to control, but in moments of silence, the cracks began to show. Arahays, meanwhile, was remembered in the department as steady and methodical. Younger officers admired her for her work ethic, while senior colleagues respected her refusal to be swayed by politics or shortcuts. She wasn't flashy, but she was dependable. For that reason alone, her absence gnawed at the team like a wound that wouldn't close. She simply wasn't the type to vanish. The sergeant, grim-faced, called the team together in the squad room. "We're treating this as high priority until we know otherwise. No assumptions, no speculation. We keep this tight. Hayes is one of our own." Heads nodded, fists clenched, the unspoken vow of law enforcement binding them together. Daniel stood among them, nodding with the rest, but his chest burned with a secret he dared not let slip. The words, "one of our own," clawed at him, stirring something ugly beneath the surface. For him, Clara wasn't just another officer. She had been something more, something forbidden, and the weight of that truth now threatened to crush him from the inside out. As search units fanned out, Daniel was paired with another patrolman, Officer Ruiz. The two drove the back roads, eyes scanning ditches and fence lines. Ruiz, a talkative man by nature, tried filling the silence. "Hayes was solid," he muttered, shaking his head. "Never thought I'd see her name on a missing persons sheet." He glanced at Daniel. "You knew her better than most, right? Partnered a lot?" Daniel's grip tightened around the steering wheel. "Yeah," he said flatly, forcing the word out like a cough. "She was good at her job. Reliable." Ruiz shrugged, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath his colleague's calm exterior. "Reliable doesn't just vanish," he muttered, turning back to the window. The words lingered between them, sharp as a blade. For Daniel, every moment felt like a performance. He played the role of worried colleague, dutiful officer, loyal partner. But behind his steady facade, memories intruded like ghosts. Nights in the patrol car where their hands brushed, the whispered promises when no one was around, the fire of something they both swore to keep hidden. He remembered Clara's laugh, but he also remembered the last time they spoke, the sharpness in her voice, the warning in her eyes. She had been slipping from his grasp, and he knew it. She had threatened what he valued most, his marriage, his career, his carefully built image of integrity. That made her not just dangerous, but unbearable. Back at the precinct, the day wore on, and theories multiplied. Detectives began combing through Clara's call logs and case files, searching for leads. But for Daniel, every question asked, every record checked, felt like a spotlight inching closer. He knew it was only a matter of time before someone looked beyond her work and into her life. And when they did, the thread of their secret affair could unravel everything. As evening fell, Daniel found himself alone in the locker room, the echo of dripping pipes filling the silence. He sat on the bench, hands clasped, staring at the floor. Duty had always been his shield, the badge his mask. But now, duty and secrecy were on a collision course, and only one could survive. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. A detective entered, folder in hand. "Mercer," she said, her tone neutral but probing. "We're going to need you to go over your timeline with us again." Daniel forced a nod, standing tall, hiding the churn of dread beneath his uniform. He followed her down the hall, every step echoing louder than the last. He told himself he could hold the line. He told himself no one would ever know. But Clara had never been a woman content with silence, and secrets, no matter how deeply buried, had a way of surfacing. The questions from detectives had barely ended when Daniel slipped out of the precinct that night, his mind drowning in memory. He drove in silence, headlights cutting through the darkness, but no matter how fast the road blurred, the past followed close behind. Clara's voice lingered in his head, not the official, measured tone of a colleague, but the hushed, vulnerable one she had reserved only for him. Their affair hadn't begun with a grand moment of passion. It had crept in quietly, almost innocently. Long shifts paired together, endless hours of shared silence in the patrol car, the kind of silence that begins to demand filling. One night, while parked on a lonely stretch of road, Clara had laughed at something trivial, and Daniel remembered how her eyes softened in a way that made the world around them disappear. It was Daniel who first crossed the line. A lingering hand when passing a flashlight, a compliment spoken too quietly to be professional. Clara resisted at first, pulling away, reminding him of the dangers. "We both have families," she whispered one night, her hands trembling even as they lingered too long on his arm. But resistance is fragile in the face of secrecy and loneliness. Soon, whispers turned to touches, and touches to nights stolen in the shadows of motel rooms just beyond town. For a while it felt intoxicating, two officers sworn to duty, tangled in something forbidden. They told themselves it was temporary, that no one would ever know. Yet each time they tried to end it, the pull dragged them back, like a tide too strong to fight. But love, when forbidden, has a way of souring into paranoia. Daniel grew restless, jealous of Clara's independence, uneasy when she pulled away. Clara, in turn, began to feel the cage tightening. She had once found safety in his arms, but soon she only felt the weight of his fear pressing against her. In the precinct, they wore masks of professionalism, but in the car at night, the tension simmered. Their arguments were whispered, sharp and dangerous. "We can't keep doing this," Clara told him during one patrol. Her eyes flicked nervously to the dashboard camera, muted but still present. "It's only a matter of time before someone sees." Daniel clenched the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. "You think you can just walk away? After everything? After what we've risked?" Her silence had been answer enough. Clara wasn't reckless, but she wasn't willing to live in chains either. She began writing in her private journal, trying to untangle the chaos inside her head. Words of guilt, of longing, of fear filled the pages. She wrote about Daniel's intensity, about how he looked at her like possession rather than love. And she wrote about her husband, about how the guilt hollowed her out each time she returned home. The affair had become less about passion and more about survival. One trapped in fear of exposure, the other in fear of him. Clara began to hint, carefully, that she might confess. "Secrets eat people alive, Daniel," she whispered once in the darkness of the car, her voice cracking. "Maybe it's better if we stop hiding." For Daniel, those words were a blade to the heart. His mind spun with images of Sky and all, his wife's devastated face, his children's confusion, the disgrace of headlines, his badge, his reputation, his life. Everything built on the image of honor could be obliterated by Clara's confession. So he whispered back, his voice colder than the night air pressing against the windows. "You can't. You know what this would do. To both of us." She turned to him, eyes glistening in the faint glow of the dashboard. "Maybe the truth is better than living like this." The silence that followed was heavier than any words. Both of them knew the affair was no longer a secret that bound them together. It was a ticking clock, its hands moving toward inevitable destruction. And somewhere deep inside Daniel, fear began hardening into something far more dangerous. The shift after Clara's whispered defiance felt different. To the outside world, she was still the steady officer, quick with a nod, precise with her reports. But behind her badge, something had shifted. Daniel saw it in the way she avoided his gaze during roll call, the way her conversations with him shrank into clipped exchanges of protocol. She was building distance, deliberate, careful, but undeniable. For Daniel, the withdrawal was a wound he could not ignore. Each patrol together became an exercise in silence. Clara would stare out the window, her reflection caught in the glass, while Daniel's grip on the wheel tightened until his hands ached. She was no longer leaning into the secrecy. They were not partners in rebellion anymore. Instead, she was drifting away, and the fear of exposure hung heavier than ever. One night, as the patrol car idled on the edge of town, Clara finally spoke, her voice calm but edged with resolve. "I can't keep doing this, Daniel. It's not fair. To my husband, to your family, to us." Daniel's chest tightened. "Fair?" he muttered, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Do you think this was ever about fair? We're in this together, Clara. You don't get to just walk away." Her jaw clenched, but her words came steady. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you. This ends." The silence that followed wasn't ordinary silence. It was dangerous, sharp, like a glass bottle on the verge of shattering. Daniel turned slowly to her, his face shadowed by the faint glow of the dash. For a moment, his expression softened, almost pleading. But beneath the mask, something darker churned. Resentment, betrayal, the panic of a man watching his control unravel. Over the next days, Clara sought refuge in small, quiet acts of independence. She stayed late in the evidence room, worked shifts without requesting him as a partner, and leaned on a trusted colleague, Officer Ruiz, for conversation. Her laughter with Ruiz was casual, innocent, but to Daniel it was gasoline poured on an open flame. Whispers began to circulate. Nothing overt, nothing concrete, just fragments. "Hayes seems distant lately. Mercer looks stressed, more than usual." Small observations that spread in locker rooms and briefing halls. Daniel felt them all like arrows, each one a reminder that cracks in the secret might already be visible. He confronted her in the narrow hallway near the locker room one evening, his voice low but taut with fury. "You're making this worse. People notice when you change your routine. They notice when you avoid me." Clara's eyes flashed with a mix of fear and defiance. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe I want them to notice." Her words stunned him, not because they were loud. She had whispered them, sharp and deliberate, but because they pierced through the fragile illusion he'd been clinging to. Clara wasn't afraid of exposure anymore. She was tired of hiding, tired of the chains their secret had become. That night, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words. His mind twisted them, reshaping them into betrayal. If she wanted people to notice, then she wasn't just walking away. She was preparing to destroy him. Every medal, every commendation, every ounce of respect he had earned would crumble if their affair came to light. His marriage, already fragile, would collapse. His children would see him as nothing more than a fraud. The cracks in the badge weren't just Clara's. They were his. His identity as a protector, a man of duty, was fracturing under the weight of fear and desire. By dawn, Daniel's reflection in the bathroom mirror felt unfamiliar. The uniform he pulled over his shoulders looked less like armor and more like a disguise. He wasn't just covering up a mistake anymore. He was covering up a life that could come crashing down at any moment. And as he fastened his badge to his chest, the decision brewing inside him grew darker, heavier. If Clara truly intended to walk away, to speak out, then the badge he wore wouldn't be enough to protect him. The tension between Clara and Daniel had become a storm barely contained within the confines of their patrol car. Every shift together was an exercise in endurance. Her silence, his clenched jaw, the unspoken war simmering between them. What had once been stolen moments of intimacy now felt like a battlefield. On a rainy Thursday night, The storm finally broke. The wipers beat furiously against the windshield as the car crawled along the rural stretch outside town. The rain blurred the world into streaks of shadow and light, but inside the car, the air was thick with words waiting to erupt. Clara stared out the passenger window, her reflection fractured by rivulets of water. Her voice cut through the hum of the engine. "Daniel, I've made up my mind. I can't keep this secret, I won't." The words landed like a punch to his chest. Daniel's grip on the wheel tightened until his knuckles gleamed white. "You don't know what you're saying," he muttered, though his voice trembled with a fury barely restrained. She turned to face him, her eyes glistening with determination rather than fear. "I do. This isn't right. We've been lying to everyone. Our families, our partners, the department. It has to end, even if it means coming clean." The car swerved slightly before Daniel steadied it, his breath harsh, ragged. "Coming clean? Do you realize what that means for me? For everything I've worked for? You'll ruin..."
"And me, Clara. You'll ruin us both."
Clara's tone was gentle, almost pleading.
"Maybe honesty is the only way forward. Maybe the truth will free us."
But Daniel heard only destruction. In his mind, the truth wasn't freedom. It was annihilation. He saw headlines screaming his disgrace, saw his wife's tears, his children's confused stares, the cold judgment of colleagues who would never forgive betrayal. All of it, crumbling because Clara couldn't keep silent. "Don't you dare!" he hissed, his voice low, shaking with suppressed rage. "Don't you dare throw everything away!" Clara's hands trembled, but her resolve did not.
"It's already gone, Daniel. Can't you see that? This isn't love anymore. It's fear. And I won't live like this."
The car slowed, Daniel pulling onto the shoulder, red taillights glowing against sheets of rain. The engine idled, but inside the car the world stood still. He turned to her fully, his face twisted between desperation and rage. "You think you can walk away from me? You think you can ruin me and just keep living your life?" Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "I'm not trying to ruin you. I'm trying to save myself." The words sliced deeper than any accusation. To Daniel, they weren't just a rejection. They were betrayal. The woman who had once whispered devotion in the dark was now preparing to expose him, to unravel everything he had built. For a long moment, the only sound was the drumming rain. Daniel's heart pounded so loud he swore she could hear it. Something inside him snapped. An invisible line pulled so taut it finally tore. His hand slammed against the dashboard, the crack of flesh on plastic echoing in the confined space. Clara flinched, her eyes wide, but she held her ground. That defiance, that unshakable will pushed him further into the abyss. "You don't get it," he whispered, voice breaking into something cold, detached. "If you talk, I lose everything. And I can't let that happen." Clara's breath quickened, the reality of his words settling in. Fear flickered across her face, but it was too late. Daniel had crossed the threshold. The rain outside masked the rising storm inside the car. The man she once trusted, the colleague she once loved, was no longer pleading. He was calculating. His silence grew more dangerous than his words. Clara turned back to the window, blinking again, and tears she didn't want him to see. Her reflection stared back at her, fractured by the rain, and in it she saw the truth. This wouldn't end with honesty. It would end with destruction. Beside her, Daniel stared into the storm, his mind no longer debating but deciding. The breaking point had arrived, and soon the highway would bear witness to a betrayal that could never be undone. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time Daniel pulled off the main road, guiding the patrol car onto a narrow service lane that wound between fields of tall grass. The tires crunched over gravel, the engine humming low in the otherwise suffocating silence. Clara shifted uneasily in the passenger seat, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice firm but laced with unease. Daniel didn't answer. His jaw was tight, eyes locked on the winding path ahead. The patrol lights were off, casting the world in shadow, the only glow coming from the faint green of the dashboard. Clara turned toward him, her patience fraying. "Daniel, this isn't funny. Pull over and talk to me." His hands gripped the wheel tighter. He wasn't thinking in words anymore, just fragments, impulses. All he knew was that the choice had been made. She couldn't be allowed to speak. Not now. Not ever. When the lane ended in a clearing bordered by trees, Daniel shifted the car into park. The silence grew unbearable. Clara exhaled sharply, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Enough. I'm going back. Whatever this is, I'm done." Her hand reached for the door, but in one swift motion, Daniel seized her wrist. His grip was iron, his eyes burning with desperation. "You don't get to leave me like this," he hissed. "You don't get to ruin everything." Clara's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "Daniel, you're scaring me." He leaned closer, his voice dropping into something cold, final. "You should be scared." The struggle erupted fast. Clara yanked free, shoving against his chest, her fingers scrambling for the door handle. But Daniel's hand shot forward, grabbing her by the collar of her uniform, pulling her back inside. The confined space became a cage, the walls closing in with every gasp, every frantic movement. "Stop fighting!" he roared, but Clara's strength surged with panic. She clawed at his hands, her voice breaking. "Let me go!" In the chaos, Daniel's hand found his duty weapon, not out of thought but out of reflex. The metallic weight felt both foreign and inevitable in his grip. Clara froze at the sight of it, her breath ragged, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Daniel, no," she whispered, tears streaking her face. "Please. You don't have to do this. We can fix it. We can—" But the storm inside him had drowned reason. To him, her words were no longer promises of hope. They were threats, daggers pointed at everything he held dear. His finger trembled on the trigger, and for a moment, hesitation flickered. Then the silence shattered. The gunshot echoed through the cleed. Ring? A sharp crack swallowed quickly by the misty night. Clara gasped, her body jolting, then slumping against the seat. Her eyes fluttered, disbelief etched in their final glimmer before closing forever. The smell of gunpowder filled the car, thick and suffocating. Daniel's ears rang, but the louder sound was his heartbeat, pounding like a drum of guilt and rage. He stared at her motionless body, chest heaving, his mind struggling to process the irrevocable truth. Clara Hayes was gone, and he had killed her. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause. The clearing was silent again, save for the steady patter of rain dripping from the trees. Daniel's grip on the weapon loosened until it fell against the floor mat with a dull thud. He pressed his hands to his face, breath tearing from him in ragged sobs, but there was no taking it back, no rewinding the clock. The betrayal was complete, not just of Clara, but of his oath, his badge, his humanity. Yet even in the crushing weight of shock, another voice clawed into his mind. Survival. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't let this scene tell its story. He had to erase it, reshape it into something else, something that made sense. Wiping his face, Daniel forced himself into motion. He looked at Clara's lifeless form, her uniform stained dark, her radio silent at her side. He reached for the gear shift with trembling hands, glancing at the road they had come from. Already, he was calculating what to move, what to clean, what to hide. He told himself he hadn't meant to do it. He told himself it was an accident, a moment of weakness. But beneath those lies, a darker truth settled in. He had chosen this path, and now he would do whatever it took to protect himself from the consequences. The midnight betrayal was complete, but the cover-up had only just begun. The gunshot still echoed in Daniel's mind as he sat frozen, staring at Clara's lifeless body. The metallic tang of blood mingled with the damp smell of rain, seeping through the cracked window. For one fleeting moment he wanted to scream, to call for help, to undo what had been done. But instinct, the same instinct that had made him pull the trigger, took over again. Survival demanded silence. His hands trembled as he reached across her slumped figure, pushing the weapon back into its holster. Every second mattered now. The scene couldn't remain as it was. If anyone discovered the truth, his career, his marriage, his life would collapse into ashes. Daniel forced the patrol car into motion, pulling out of the clearing with the headlights off. The road stretched before him, dark and endless, his thoughts racing with every bump of the gravel. He replayed Clara's final words in his head. "We can fix it." And for an instant, guilt almost tore him apart. But he clenched the wheel tighter, reminding himself there was no fixing anything anymore. 10 miles down the highway, he pulled over near an abandoned service stop. The rain had washed most of the dust away, leaving the concrete slick and empty. Here, he thought, the story could change. He opened Clara's door and, with a deep breath, dragged her body out. Her head lolled to the side, hair damp against her cheek, eyes closed as if in restless sleep. He laid her gently on the ground, a twisted echo of tenderness betraying the brutality of his act. He reached for her radio, pressing it against her uniform as if it had fallen in a struggle. Next came the car. He wiped down the steering wheel where her fingerprints might be, then dragged her service weapon from its holster, placing it beside her hand. A robbery gone wrong, he told himself. A confrontation, a shootout on patrol. A tragedy that would draw sympathy rather than suspicion. But no matter how he arranged the pieces, the scene looked staged. His breathing quickened, panic clawing at the edges of his resolve. He needed fire, he realized. Fire erased mistakes. Fire rewrote stories. Daniel popped the trunk, retrieving an old emergency fuel canister. His hands shook as he doused the ground near her body, the pungent smell rising like an accusation. He hesitated only once, the flick of the lighter in his hand casting a faint glow on her pale face. For a heartbeat, he saw her alive again, laughing, teasing him during long shifts, whispering promises he had believed. Then the flame dropped. The fire roared to life instantly, orange tongues devouring grass, uniform, and flesh alike. Smoke spiraled upward, carrying his betrayal into the midnight sky. He stood frozen, the heat searing his skin, until the weight of reality pressed him back toward the car. He couldn't stay. Not now. Sliding into the driver's seat, Daniel pulled away from the scene, watching the glow fade in his rearview mirror until darkness reclaimed the night. His chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, his mind already rehearsing the lies he would tell. She had gone missing during patrol. He had lost contact with her radio. He had searched, but by the time he found her, it was too late. But even as he practiced the story, a part of him knew the truth couldn't stay buried forever. Fire destroyed evidence, but not suspicion. Not guilt. The rain began again, heavier now, smothering the lingering smoke behind him. Daniel tightened his grip on the wheel, the first threads of paranoia weaving into his thoughts. He had covered the tracks, yes, but for how long? The station was no longer a place of refuge for Daniel. It had become a cage. Each time he walked through its glass doors, he felt the eyes of his colleagues burning into him, their conversations halting just a beat too long when he passed. The walls that once echoed with camaraderie now pressed inward with suspicion. Clara's death had been ruled under investigation, and while the official line remained cautious, the whispers said otherwise. Officers who had worked with her spoke quietly about the closeness between her and Daniel. Others remembered late-night shifts, unexplained absences, and glances exchanged that lingered just a little too long. The rumors were gathering momentum, and with them came questions that no staged fire could erase. Detective Marissa Cole, assigned to lead the inquiry, was not one for half measures. A seasoned investigator with sharp instincts, she had already begun piecing together the inconsistencies. The fire had destroyed much of the evidence, but not everything. A half-melted radio, charred remnants of footprints, and fragments of tire tracks had survived the flames. They painted a picture, not of random violence, but of something far more deliberate. Daniel sat across from her in the small interview room, his uniform crisp, his hands clasped tightly on the table. He had rehearsed his lines endlessly in the mirror, each word sharpened to appear natural. Yet when Marissa leaned forward, her eyes cutting through him, the script began to unravel. "You were the last one to see her alive," she said evenly. "You responded to her call, correct?" Daniel nodded. "Yes. We split patrol near Route 19. She didn't check back in. I searched for her, but by the time I found her, it was already too late." His voice cracked slightly on the last words, as if grief had taken hold. Marissa's pen scratched across her notebook. "And the fire?" His throat tightened. "I don't know. Maybe the suspect set it to cover his tracks. By the time I called it in, it was out of control." A long silence followed. Marissa tilted her head, studying him. "Funny thing about fire," she murmured. "It hides some things, yes, but not everything. The accelerant we found? That wasn't from some drifter's matchbook. It came from an emergency fuel canister, the same kind issued to patrol units." Daniel's heart thundered. He forced a steady breath, fighting the tremor in his hands. "Plenty of units have those. Anyone could have used it." Her gaze didn't waver. "Perhaps. But only one of those units was parked near the scene that night. Yours." The words struck like a hammer. Daniel's practiced calm faltered, a bead of sweat sliding down his temple. He leaned back in his chair, attempting to disguise panic with indignation. "Are you accusing me of killing my partner?" he demanded, his voice rising. Marissa's expression remained neutral, her voice calm. "I'm saying the story doesn't add up, and I intend to find out why." The interview ended with no confession, but the damage had been done. As Daniel stepped out of the room, he felt the shift in the air. Colleagues who once nodded with respect now avoided his eyes. The silence of suspicion was louder than any accusation. At home, the pressure only deepened. His wife, Emily, had begun to notice the cracks, the late nights, the distant stares, the way he flinched at sudden noises. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, she confronted him.
"Daniel," she
said softly,
"what are you hiding from me?"
He turned away, gripping the edge of the counter until his knuckles whitened. "Nothing. Just stress from the job." But Emily's eyes lingered, filled with a mixture of fear and doubt. She didn't press further, but the silence between them grew heavier, another weight on his already crumbling shoulders. Back at the station, Detective Cole gathered more threads. Surveillance footage placed Daniel's unit near the service stop at a suspicious hour. The accelerant traces matched the canister from his vehicle. Witnesses recalled tension between him and Clara. Piece by piece, the noose was tightening. Daniel knew it. Each night, sleep slipped further from his grasp, replaced by visions of Clara's face in the flames, by the echo of her last plea. He had covered his tracks, but the trail he left behind was beginning to glow under the relentless eyes of the investigation. The badge he once wore with pride now felt like a ticking clock strapped to his chest, counting down to the moment everything would collapse. The discovery of Clara's diary sent a shiver through the precinct, though Daniel was the only one who felt the true weight of its contents. Small, neat handwriting spilled across yellowed pages, each word a testament to her fears, her desires, and the secret life they had shared. He had never imagined that she had kept such detailed records, notes about shifts, conversations, and most damningly, their affair. Late at night, when the station had emptied and the hum of fluorescent lights was the only sound, Daniel found himself drawn to those pages again and again. He never touched them in front of anyone else, yet their presence haunted him. He imagined Clara's voice echoing in the margins, whispers meant only for him, now screaming accusations he could not escape. She never lied, he muttered to himself one night, staring at the diary on his kitchen counter. The rain pattered against the window, muffling the distant hum of traffic. She never lied, and I... His voice broke, caught between guilt and terror. Each entry he read made his pulse quicken. She had written about the tension in the patrol car, the stolen nights, and the arguments that had grown sharper over time. In the margins, she sketched small symbols, hearts crossed out, a tally of moments she feared would destroy them. There were passages where she pleaded with herself, not him, to find courage, to speak the truth, and reclaim her life. Daniel's mind twisted with paranoia. Every word felt like a finger pointing directly at him, every phrase a ghost of betrayal. He could almost hear her, whispering his failings back to him in the dark, reminding him that the secret was never truly gone. He was haunted not just by her absence, but by the life they had shared and the consequences he had unleashed. He tried to rationalize, telling himself it had been an accident, a panic-driven moment that had spun out of control. But the diary refused absolution. Clara's words cast a mirror to his darkest impulses, reflecting back a man he no longer recognized. A man who had silenced the only person who had ever trusted him fully. Even during his patrols, her presence lingered. He would catch himself imagining her at the edge of the road, standing in the fog, eyes fixed on him with disappointment and fear. Shadows morphed into her figure in every dark alley, every misty clearing along the highway. Each time he closed his eyes, the pages of the diary turned themselves, her handwriting searing into his memory like a brand. At home, the ghost manifested differently. His wife, Emily, noticed his sleepless nights, the way he flinched at subtle sounds, the muttered words he tried to hide. Daniel projected Clara onto every interaction, her warning, her defiance, her piercing eyes, until the line between memory and hallucination blurred. He began to speak to the diary as if it were her. "You're still here," he whispered one evening, running his fingers along the worn pages. "You won't leave me alone, will you?" In the silence, he imagined a response, a reproachful gaze, a quiet reminder of the choice he had made and the life he had destroyed. Every time he reached for calm, the ghost of her judgment yanked him back into panic. At the precinct, whispers of his unease had begun to circulate. Colleagues noticed his hands trembling during briefings, the way his eyes darted when confronted with routine questions. Daniel's internal collapse was mirrored in the outside world, though no one yet knew the full reason. The investigation was tightening, and the diary had created a tether to the truth that would not be broken. In the nights that followed, Daniel understood that he could never escape Clara. Her ghost was everywhere. The highways, the misty clearings, the empty patrol car, all were reminders of the life they had shared and the life he had destroyed. And in the silence of his home, alone with the diary, he whispered what he feared most. "You'll never leave me." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, Hars's, and unyielding, as Daniel Mercer sat alone at the metal table. The interrogation room smelled faintly of bleach and cold steel. Every detail pressed against him. Walls too close, the single one-way mirror that seemed to watch his every thought, the hard chair that dug into his back. Detective Marissa Cole entered with a folder, her steps measured, calm, deliberate. She set the folder down and leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "Daniel, we need to go over the events of that night again," she said, her voice soft but insistent. "The fire, the disappearance. Where were you? And what did you do?" Daniel's fingers drummed against the table, a nervous rhythm he could not control. He swallowed hard, forcing words into a rehearsed cadence. I searched for her.
I followed the calls, checked the service lane, but she wasn't there. When I found the scene, it was already... His voice faltered, cracking under the weight of the lie. Marissa watched him silently, the faint arch of her brow betraying nothing, yet revealing everything. Already too late? She prompted. Daniel, you understand how implausible that is. The fire was controlled. Accelerant traces matched the canister issued to your vehicle. Witnesses place you near the service stop. His pulse thundered, each word a strike against the fragile facade he had built. He leaned back, trying to steady his breathing, but the tightness in his chest was unrelenting. I can't explain that, he whispered, the edges of desperation creeping into his voice. Marissa didn't flinch. She slid a sheet of paper across the table, a fragment of Clara's diary, one he had never imagined could surface. His stomach twisted as he saw her neat handwriting, the intimate, damning details of their affair, and her fears about his temper, her warnings that he might not be able to contain himself. You understand this doesn't paint a good picture, Marissa said quietly. Her words suggest fear. Fear of you. You need to tell the truth, Daniel, because we are not blind to the patterns, and we have all the evidence we need to challenge your story. Daniel's hands shook. He gripped the edge of the table until his nails bit into his palms, a physical anchor against the rising panic. I didn't mean... Marissa's tone sharpened slightly, not with anger, but with precision. Daniel, intent doesn't erase consequence. And lying to this department, to us, will not help you. Your story is falling apart, and every second you stall makes it worse. The walls of the room seemed to close in further. Sweat dripped down his temples, mixing with the shadows cast by the harsh lighting. He felt Clara's presence in the air, her ghost hovering in every corner, accusing, judging. The diary had already become a specter he could not silence. Detective Cole leaned forward again. Daniel, look at me. You can come clean now. Confess what happened. The alternative is far worse. We will reconstruct the night from every angle, every witness, every trace. His throat burned, words trapped behind a barricade of pride, fear, and guilt. He remembered the fire, her pleading, the weight of the badge he had once worn with pride. And in that room he felt the culmination of every secret, every deception crushing him, leaving only a raw, exposed man. Finally, the first cracks appeared. His hands fell to the table, trembling. He exhaled sharply, eyes darting to the diary fragment. I didn't want it to happen, he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for her to die. Marissa leaned back, noting the confession carefully, but she didn't react. She let the moment settle, the weight of his admission filling the space between them. Outside the room, the investigation had reached its apex. Every lie, every cover-up, every act of desperation had led to this confrontation. Daniel Mercer, once confident in his control, was now unmasked, haunted, and trapped by the consequences of his own choices. And as the silence stretched, he realized that nothing would ever restore what had been lost. Not Clara, not the truth, and not the life he had tried so desperately to protect. The courthouse loomed like a cold monument as Daniel Mercer stepped inside, his polished shoes echoing against the marble floors. Every step felt heavier than the last, weighted not just by the metal badge he had once worn proudly, but by the invisible chains of guilt that had followed him since that night on the deserted highway. The trial was set to be swift, the evidence against him undeniable. Clara's diary had survived, smoldering fragments now meticulously preserved and catalogued. Witnesses had recounted tension-filled shifts, whispered arguments, and unusual behavior. Surveillance footage, though incomplete, had placed him near the scene, and forensic analysis confirmed the accelerant from his patrol unit. The flames he had thought would erase everything had only illuminated the truth. Daniel sat at the defendant's table, hands clasped tightly, staring blankly at the polished wood in front of him.
His lawyer whispered instructions occasionally, but the words barely penetrated the fog of self-recrimination that had settled over him. Each time he glanced at the gallery, he imagined Clara's face, her wide, pleading eyes, her final words replaying in his mind with merciless clarity. The prosecution began with a meticulous account of the night. Step by step, they reconstructed the events, their narrative precise, cold, and undeniable. The fire, the accelerant, the movements, the phone calls, all evidence pointing to deliberate action. The jury listened, silent but attentive, as if each piece of truth weighed heavier on Daniel's chest. Marissa Cole took the stand next. Her testimony was measured, recounting interviews, observations, and the fragments of Clara's diary she had preserved. She described the affair, the arguments, and the escalating tension that had culminated in that fatal night. Each word was a hammer striking at the fortress Daniel had built around himself. Daniel's defense tried to argue panic, an accident fueled by fear, but the inconsistencies were too glaring. The staged scene, the deliberate use of fire, the careful placement of objects, all spoke of calculation, not momentary lapse. Daniel's own partial confessions during interrogation sealed the narrative. His lawyer could only try to soften the edges, but the core truth was unassailable. Outside the court, Emily watched from the gallery, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes betrayed a mixture of heartbreak and disbelief. She had once trusted the man she married, but now, sitting among the families and colleagues, she faced the crushing reality of betrayal. Daniel had crossed a line from which there was no return. During closing arguments, the prosecution painted Daniel not just as a man who killed, but as a figure corrupted by fear, jealousy, and obsession. The defense pleaded for mercy, for understanding of human frailty, but the shadow of his actions loomed too large. Every whispered secret, every stolen moment, every calculated lie had led to this inevitable conclusion. The jury deliberated for hours, and Daniel sat alone in the waiting room, replaying Clara's ghostly presence in his mind. The hallway outside echoed with distant conversations, but to him it was the whisper of her voice, accusing, relentless. He thought of the patrols, the stolen nights, the fire, and the diary, all shadows that now surrounded him inescapably. Finally, the courtroom doors opened. The foreperson read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree. Daniel's world, once structured around authority and control, fractured into irreparable pieces. The judge's gavel punctuated the finality, echoing in his mind like the gunshot he had long tried to forget. Sentencing was swift. Daniel was given life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The badge he had once worn proudly would remain a symbol, but now it was tarnished beyond recognition, a stark reminder of everything he had destroyed. As Daniel was led away, he passed Emily in the gallery. She looked at him one last time, her expression a mixture of sorrow and relief. He did not speak, could not meet her gaze. Clara's ghost lingered in the courtroom, in every shadow, in every whispered memory, a reminder that some truths cannot be erased. Outside, the rain fell gently, washing over the courthouse steps. The highway, silent now, carried no evidence of the tragedy, yet every passing car, every flicker of headlights, whispered the memory of a betrayal that had begun with a whispered affair and ended in irreversible darkness. Justice had been served, but at a cost no one could undo. For Daniel Mercer, the shadows of his choices would follow him forever, a silent witness to a love, a fear, and a crime that had consumed everything in its path. The courtroom had emptied, leaving only echoes of finality behind. Daniel Mercer's life, once carefully structured around duty and pride, now existed entirely within the walls of a prison cell. The badge he had worn, the authority he had wielded, and the respect he had commanded, all of it had disintegrated, leaving only a man stripped bare by his choices. Outside, the world moved on. Patrols continued along the same highways he had once walked, now carried out by officers who had no memory of the secrets buried beneath the asphalt. But for Daniel, the passage of time offered no solace. Every day, every shadowed corridor, and every flicker of light through his cell bars reminded him of Clara. Her voice, her eyes, the final plea he could never forget. He spent hours in silence, reflecting on the moments that had led him here. Thena, he whispers, the stolen nights, the tension that had escalated beyond his control, all now appeared with brutal clarity. Daniel recognized the patterns of his own fear and obsession, the choices that had begun small but had grown into a chain of irreversible acts. Guilt became a constant companion. He replayed Clara's words in his mind, her warnings, her courage, and her unwavering resolve. Her diary had survived, and with it, her truth, documenting not only the affair, but her fears of him, the tension that had mounted night after night, and her desperate desire to reclaim her life. Every page was a mirror, reflecting the man he had become and the irreversible damage he had done. Even his family was fractured. Emily, his wife, had chosen to sever ties, unable to reconcile the man she had loved with the murderer he had become. Visits were brief and tense, filled with the awkward silence of estrangement. Their children, too young to fully understand the complexities, had begun to see the contours of betrayal etched into their father's face. The life he had once protected, he now endangered with every memory and thought. In the prison yard, Daniel walked alone, the clinking of chains and distant voices forming a soundtrack to his reflection. Fellow inmates were unaware of his past, seeing only the man behind bars. But to Daniel, the prison was not a refuge. It was a reminder of the world he had destroyed. Authority, control, and pride had led him to a point where justice had been served. But redemption remained impossible. He thought of Clara often, not with hope or desire, but with recognition of loss. The justice he had feared, the consequences he had sought to avoid, had arrived in full force. She would never be restored, and neither would he. The fire he had once set to erase evidence had only illuminated the depth of his own corruption. Every act of desperation had left a mark, and every mark had led to this unyielding judgment. Daniel began to understand that justice and redemption were not always aligned. The law had punished him, society had condemned him, and the truth had been revealed. Yet the moral reconciliation, the inner peace that might have salvaged a fragment of his humanity, remained beyond reach. Every night he heard the echo of Clara's voice in the silence of his cell, a ghost of love, a warning unheeded, a life ended too soon. In letters to the court he expressed remorse, but words could not erase blood, nor could they soften the weight of betrayal. He knew that apology was insufficient, that the only certainty he now possessed was the permanence of his own failure. Justice had been delivered, but the soul behind the badge would never be free. He would serve the remainder of his life under the unyielding judgment of law, memory, and conscience. Every day, he walked the fine line between survival and despair, carrying the burden of his actions like a shadow that would never fade. And as the sun set beyond the high concrete walls, Daniel Mercer looked out at the distant horizon, realizing that some crimes leave a legacy not just of punishment, but of eternal reckoning. Justice had arrived, cold and impartial, but redemption, true, human, and compassionate, was a gift he would never receive. The highways he had once patrolled stretched endlessly before him in memory, silent witnesses to a betrayal that could never be undone, to a life consumed by secrets, obsession, and the tragic cost of human desire. Justice had its victor, but for Daniel Mercer, there would never be forgiveness nor reprieve. Only the unbroken echo of a lover's ghost and the shadow of choices that would haunt him forever.